Arica is one of the many characters available in this war of mine. She is known for her stealth, which makes her a valuable character in your team. Welcome back to a survivor's guide to this war of mine. Today we will be starting our character tutorials with Arica. We will start with going over the mechanics of the character before moving on to her lore and story. Let's start with the obvious benefit of Arica, that being her sneaks quietly trait. This is incredibly useful for stealing from any location or remaining hidden at locations with people who want to deal you harm. The mechanics behind her ability can be clearly seen when she is out scavenging, with the rings of noise emanating from her being much smaller than any other character. This means that fewer people will hear her even when she's running through a location. It is also worth noting that this can be a negative, especially if you want to lure someone to their demise. If you run around above or below someone, you cannot lure them to you so that you would be able to take them out from a hiding place. This negative, though, is very minor, as you won't need to worry about taking people out nearly as much with her, given that she can just sneak past. The other technical information about her is that she has a smoking addiction, she has an inventory size of 10 and is graded A for both combat and guarding. Overall, she is a great addition to any team, even though her consoling leaves a bit to be desired. The final thing to talk about mechanically is her personality. She's reasonably caring and therefore is affected by her fellow survivors' states, although she can switch to being fully selfish if she is traumatized enough. She is also less impacted by others or herself stealing given her background, but she does feel remorse if she is stealing from innocent people. So that's the mechanics of Arica. Now we will talk about her story. Arica was mistreated by her father often and so ended up on the streets of Gravia, stealing from others to survive. She fled to Pogoran when the military massacred her hometown. If she starts in the group of survivors, then she will have met with the other survivors when she arrived in Pogoran. Otherwise, she will ask for shelter in exchange for using her skills for the good of the group. Spending time with Arica will reveal the full extent of her story, either in a good way or a bad way, depending on how she is feeling and how you act in the game. We will go through both now. Arica's good story. Number 1. I told you about my old man. I hated that arsehole. But war does things to people. That night, when the bombs fell on Gravia, something changed. What he did, I'll never forget it. You heard what they did in Gravia, right? Number 2. On that night, I got a shrapnel in the thigh. The army entered the city and indiscriminately started slaughtering rebels and civilians. We had to scram, and I couldn't even rise from my bed. So I was just lying there, waiting for death to come. I was hoping the old drunk would save himself, not stay with me till the end. Why worry about something you can't change? Number 3. He carried me out of the city. He walked all night. We flowed with a terrified crowd. Father carried me all the way. I have no idea where that old alcoholic found the strength. The day broke and he was still carrying me. When we got here, he just dropped to his knees and died. I will always remember the last words he whispered. Number 4. He'd always been rough, never said what lay heavily on him, but at that moment he broke. You have to make it, kid, he said right before he died. You gotta be tough. All that's bad will end someday. He looked at me, pleading. Like me. Arica's bad story. Number 1. I made it all the way from Gravia to Pogoran, and for what? More shelling, more bloodshed. Maybe it would have been better if I'd died there, and then. You heard what the Grasny did in Gravia? Number 2. After several hours of bombing the town, the military stormed the city and started slaughtering rebels and civilians like cattle. Wounded by shrapnel, I couldn't run, couldn't even walk. I was sure my old man would leave me behind. The arsehole never cared about me anyway. Why would he, all of a sudden? Number 3. Without saying a word, he lifted me up and started walking. He walked all night like that, grim, determined, silent. The sun rose and he kept on walking. Where did he even get the strength for that? Beats me. But he carried me all the way to Pogoran, and as soon as we got here, he collapsed to the ground and died. Was it worth it? Number 4. He carried me here and left me alone. We never talked much. He always kept his thoughts to himself. You know what he said right before he died? This is the last time anyone ever helped you, kid. You're on your own now. As you can see, Arica has had a difficult life. Hopefully you can help her have a better future. Depending on how well you do that job, you could get the following outcomes. If Arica dies in the game, we get the epitaph. Tough girl as she was, Arica died. Harsh reality of living in a ghetto could not be compared to the horrors of war. What would have become of her if she'd survived? We will never know. If Arica kills herself due to depressed, broken, or other conditions. Troubled Arica couldn't take it anymore and killed herself. It turns out she was much more sensitive and fragile than she showed. If she leaves the shelter, Arica left the shelter without a word. She resurfaced later on as a juvenile gang leader. If you don't let her stay with you. We decided that Arica couldn't stay with us. We would be better off without her. If Arica makes it to the end of the war, but with bad karma from doing terrible acts in the war. Although Arica survived the war, she found it difficult to adjust to normal life. She did not trust anyone and relied only on herself. Presently, she is serving a sentence for burglary. If she survives the war, but is sad about what has happened. Arica survived the war, though remained mistrustful of others. The horrors she'd witnessed made it difficult for her to find friends. She was afraid of starting a family, not believing she'd make a good parent. And finally, if you get Arica to the end of the war, in good spirits and having not committed atrocities, you get. After the war, Arica gave her father a symbolic funeral and kept his picture. Despite the horrors she witnessed, she managed to start a family and tried to be a better parent than her father had been. So there we have Arica. I hope you enjoyed this episode and will join me next week. Do subscribe so you don't miss it. It will be Anton, and I will be going through all of the main game characters before moving then onto the extended game characters and the DLCs, and then the custom characters as well. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you then. Ta-ra.